Hey guys, we are ready for Unit 5. We're on Lesson 1. It's been a while since I have had a lesson on here. Mr. Eads has been taken over for most of Unit 4. I'm excited to be back. So, Lesson 1 is going to be using equivalent fractions to find common denominators. You can see that we're going to be able to use equivalent fractions to find common denominators and solve problems. We're going to be able to use equivalent fractions as a strategy to add and subtract fractions as well. Let's start off with a little warm up. It says to estimate and write on your slates or a piece of paper if you're at home whether the sums and differences are closest to 0, 1/2, or 1. So let's take a look at the first one here. We've got 1/4 minus 3/12. So you want to estimate and think about, is the difference, because we do see that we are working with subtraction all through the three of these, and we know that that means subtract, that means differences. If we were to take 1/4 minus 3/12, do you believe that would be closest to 0, 1/2, or 1? Hopefully you said 0, because when we're using estimation, we know that 1/4 is closer to 0 to start with, and 3/12 is close to 0 as well. We also know that 3/12 is equivalent to 1/4. So this first one, we actually have 1/4 minus 1/4, which would equal 0. 1/2 minus 1/3. Would that be closest to 0, 1/2, or 1? We can leave 1/2 where it's at, and then we can think about 1/3. Would we round that to 0 or 1/2? Even if we rounded it up to 1/2, we would still have 1 as our estimation. And then finally, 8/10 minus 2/5. When I'm looking at 8/10, I could round it up to 1. I see that it only needs 2/10 more to get to 1. So I would have 1 minus 1/2, because 2/5 is close to 2/4, which is 1/2. So I know here I'm going to take 1 minus 1/2, and so my estimation is going to be 1/2. So what we're going to be doing today is using equivalent fractions to find common denominators. Well, common denominators are for two or more fractions. It's a number that is a multiple of both or all denominators. For example, the fractions 1/2 and 2/3 have the common denominators 6, 12, 18, and so on. If the fractions have the same denominator, that denominator is called a common denominator. We're going to look at equivalent fractions. So fractions that name the same number. For example, 1/2 and 4/8 are equivalent fractions, where they mean the same thing. They have the same value. And the equivalent fractions rule, a rule stating that if the numerator and denominator of a fraction are each multiplied or divided by the same non-zero number, the result is a fraction equivalent to the original fraction. So we're ready for our math message. It says to solve the following problems. You may use fraction circle pieces, and we know that those, if you are virtually learning, those are on the Everyday Math website in the e-toolkit. You can use a number line. You can even draw pictures to help you. So we've got 3/5 plus 1/5, 1/2 plus 1/4, and 1/4 plus 1/3. Go ahead, pause your video now, solve these however you wish, and then come back and check and see if your work is the same as mine. All right. So you can see that on the first one, I've got this in blue. It says 3/5 plus 1/5. And I circled the denominators, and I can see that they are the same. So I simply just added across the numerators, and I got 4/5. For 1/2 plus 1/4, I can see that the denominators are not the same. I changed the 1/2 to 2/4, and then I added 2/4 plus 1/4, and I got 3/4. And finally, for 1/4 plus 1/3, I had to change both of these. So you can see up here, I did 4 times 3 is 12, and 3 times 4 is 12. So I changed 1/4 into 3/12, and 1/3 into 4/12. And then I added 3 plus 4 is 7, and I kept my denominator of 12. So we can see 1/2 and 2/4. These fractions are equivalent. Remember that word right here, equivalent means equal. They're equivalent fractions, or they're fractions that are the same value. Possible strategies for finding equivalent fractions would be as follows. You could exchange fraction circle pieces if you decided to use those. For example, to find fractions equivalent to 1/2, you find a fraction circle pieces that completely cover the pink piece. 2 yellow, which are 1/4 pieces, cover one pink 1/2 piece. So 2/4 is equivalent to 1/2. Another possible strategy is using the multiplication rule for the equivalent fractions, and that is what I did. So to use the multiplication rule for equivalent fractions, to summarize the rule, you generate fractions that are equivalent to a given fraction. You multiply the numerator and the denominator by the same number. For example, to find a fraction equivalent to 1/2, you multiply both the numerator and the denominator by 2. You can see this example right here. On the top, the numerator, we've got 1 times 2, and the denominator 2 times 2, which gives us an equivalent fraction of 2/4. So why don't you pause your video in a moment and write down some fractions that are equivalent to 2. We've already said, or 1/2, we've already said 2/4. What else would be equivalent to 1/2? All right, so I have listed a few that maybe you chose. I did 3/6, 4/8, 5/10, 6/12, 7/14, 8/16, 9/18. We also did 10/20, 20/40. Any of those would be equivalent to half. What you can also check is your numerator 1/2 of your denominator? That's a good way of checking your equivalent fractions for a half. So moving on, reviewing multiplication rule for equivalent fractions, you can see here, you might start off with the fraction 1/4, and then you're going to multiply both the numerator and the denominator by a number. So for example, multiplying 1/4 times 2/2. 1 times 2 is 2, 4 times 2 is 8. Maybe you multiplied it by 3 instead. 1 times 3 is 3, 4 times 3 is 12. So you can see as you look across this table, this chart, 1/4 is equivalent to 2/8, 3/12, 4/16, 5/20. We did the same thing for 1/3. So 1/3 times 2/2 is 2/6. We did it for 3, 4, and 5. So you can see 1/3 is equivalent to 3/9, 4/12, and 5/15. Which equivalent fractions could we use to help us add 1/4 and 1/3? Take a look back at this. Which fractions could we use to add these two numbers? I hope you saw that we could use 3/12 and 4/12. 3/12 and 4/12 because we've created that common denominator. Why do the 12s? Oh, why do the 12s make sense for this problem? Well, again, it's because they are the same number. They're the same denominator. They help us add. We know that when we are adding or subtracting fractions, our denominators must be the same. When fractions are renamed with the same denominator, the denominator is called a common denominator. For the fractions, a common denominator simply means same denominator. So anytime you hear those keywords, common denominator together, that just means it's the same. It's the exact same denominator. Turn to page 154 in your brand new math journal number 2. If you do not have your math journal number 2 for some reason, remember you have access to it on the Everyday Math website. If you forget how to access that, please just contact your teacher and they can help you out. So on page 154, you see that there is problem number 1, and it's continuation of that chart, that table that we looked at. Equivalent fractions have the same value again as the original fraction because the numerator and the denominator change by the same factor. And we know that if I put the number 3 over 3, I've created a fraction of 3/3. And we know that 3/3 is equivalent to 1. So if I'm multiplying 1/2 times 2 over 2, I'm really just multiplying 1/2 times 1. That's why this is working out. That's why they are equivalent. That's why they're equal, because we're really just multiplying it by the number 1. So your job now is to fill in the table by using the information given to help you find the equivalent fractions. You can see in the example here, 1/2, and then we multiplied the numerator and the denominator by 2. And here they did 1 times 2 is 2, 2 times 2 is 4. So we got the equivalent fraction of 2/4. I'm going to do the first one of 2/5. Now, I do want you to notice that on 1/2 and 2/5, it is gray. And so we're going to find out why in a little bit. So 2/5 times 2 over 2. I'm going to do my work over here because this spot is too small for us. So I'm going to do 2/5. And notice I'm just going to, on the top, write 2 times 2. And on the bottom, it's going to be 5 times 2. And I know 2 times 2 is 4, and 5 times 2 is 10. So my new fraction right here, that's going to go right here, is going to be 4/10. Hopefully you write that a little bit better because you've got a little bit more space when you're doing it with your pencil. So you are to finish filling out this table, and then notice this question down here. I want you to answer this as well. What do you notice about the fractions that are in the gray shaded boxes? I've already done one for you. You get to do the other one. Pause your video, come back, and let's check our work. Okay, so hopefully you have completed this. Let's go ahead and check this work together, check out what the equivalent fraction should be. Taking a look, let's look at the 1/2 section first. 1/2 times 3 over 3 was 3/6. 1/2 times 5 over 5 was 5/10. We did the 2/5 times 2 over 2. We got 4/10 earlier. Now when you multiply it by 3 over 3, you get 6/15. And when you multiply 2/5 times 5 over 5, we get 10/25. And hopefully in your work, you noticed that they have a common denominator in the shaded boxes. They have a denominator of 10, which is going to help us as we move on. So let's look at problem number 2. Use the table above, so the table that we just looked at, to help solve these problems. So you're going to do 1/2 plus 2/5. Hopefully you've noticed that you can use this gray box on both to find that common denominator and to solve 1/2 plus 2/5. You're going to do 1/2 minus 2/5, and then you're going to tell me, is 1/2 less than, greater than, or equal to 2/5? Pause your video now, work out these problems, and then come back and check with me. By now you should have solved A, B, and C. Let's check them out together. 1/2 plus 2/5 does equal 9/10. You'll see that common denominator of 10. And 1/2 minus 2/5 is 1/10. And again, that common denominator of 10. When we're figuring out, we see that we're taking 5/10 plus 4/10 or 5/10 minus 4/10. And we can see that 1/2 is greater than 2/5 because 5/10 is greater than 4/10. And finally, on page 154, 155, you have some work to do. You are to finish filling in on problem number 3. Fill in the table by using the information given. So you see 2/3, and then you're going to multiply it by the numerator and the denominator. So even though it's just one digit listed, remember that you're actually, for each one of these, you're going to do multiply by 2 over 2. This isn't just a 3, it's a 3 over 3. 4 over 4. 5 over 5. And 6 over 6. So don't let that fool you. I know in the past I've had some people just look at this as a single digit, and then they actually tried to do 2/3 times 2. That's not what we're doing right now. We're doing 2/3 times 2 over 2. Okay? So pause your video, go ahead and solve those. And you can also, let me change this back to my, do problems 1 and 2 using that table. It's the same thing that we practiced with. And this is your this is your check. So filling out that table and then using the tables to solve 1/3 minus 1/6, 1/3 plus 1/2, and then listing 4 equivalent fractions for 1/4 and 1/5. Pause your video and come back. All right, let's check these answers for the table, all of your equivalent fractions. I'm going to read them off. You can look at them. 2/3 is equivalent to 4/6, 6/9, 8/12, 10/15, and 12/18. 1/6 is equivalent to 2/12, 3/18, 4/24, 5/30, and 6 over 36. And finally, 1/3 is equivalent to 2/6, 3/9, 4/12, 5/15, and 6/18. Now remember, you're going to use this table and the other one to help you solve these problems. Again, you should have already solved these. Let's check them out together. 1/3 minus 1/6, we see that the common denominator is actually 6. So our new number sentence is 2/6 minus 1/6, which gives us an answer of 1/6. 1/3 plus 1/2, the equivalent or the common denominator is 6. You are going to have to change both of these fractions this time. The new number sentence is 2/6 plus 3/6 equals 5/6. And 4 equivalent fractions, these are just samples, but for 1/4 you should have been able to list possibly 2/8, 3/12, 4/16, 5/20, and for 1/5, 2/10, 3/15, 4/20, 5/25. And again, we use for 1/4 and 1/5, we use the same sort of method of multiplying it by those fractions that were equivalent to 1. Finally, what I'd like you to try is number 3. It says make an estimate, then solve by finding fractions with the common denominator. Use the tables and lists of equivalent fractions above and on journal page 154 to help you. So all the work you've done so far in this lesson, you should be using to help you solve these next problems. You're going to write a number sentence with the common denominator and summarize each problem. So notice you want to do your estimation, tell me what your common denominator is, the new number sentence, and what the final answer is. Then for number 4, you're going to rewrite the fractions as equivalent and tell me which one are they greater than, less than, or equal to one another. Pause the video now, do this last bit of work, and we'll come back and. All right. Let's check it out. I'm just going to simply read the answers, but you have on your screen here, you have what the common denominators are. You can see what the number sentences are. So if we take 1/2 minus 1/4, that actually equals 1/4. 1/2 plus 1/6 equals 4/6. 1/4 plus 2/3 equals 11/12. And 1/4 minus 1/6 equals 1/12. And finally, rewriting those fractions, number 4, 1/2 is greater than 2/5. We know this because we actually compared 5/10 to 4/10. And then 1/3 is equal to 2/6 because 1/3 can become 2/6. So that is the end of lesson 1 of unit 5. Again, we were using equivalent fractions to find common denominators. That was allowing us to find common denominators and solve problems and use equivalent fractions as a strategy to add and subtract fractions. Before we end this video, I'd like to go over your 5.1 independent work. So you will see that's Google Slides. On slide 2, you're going to be following the directions of creating a new fraction. So for example, this first one says multiply both the numerator and the denominator of the fraction 1/2 by 2. This is very similar to what we just did in our lesson. So you would take 1 times 2 and 2 times 2, and you get a new fraction of 2/4. And then it says build 1/2 and your new fraction with fraction circle pieces. What do you notice? So go ahead and you're going to have to access the Everyday Math website for those fraction circle pieces to be able to answer part B of each of these. The next slide says to use multiplication rule for equivalent fractions to generate equivalent fractions. Again, this is just like what we did in our book, except now you're filling it out digitally. I filled out this one here for you. I did 1/3 times 3/3. So I did 1 times 3 was 3. 3 times 3, whoops, messed up on that one. Good thing I checked my work. 3/9. So you will do that same thing for all the text boxes that have no writing in them. So again, that connects to exactly what we did. You will need to complete Math Box 5.1, and again, we're in journal number 2. And then the last 2 slides are a challenge. I would hopefully you will try them out. But it says the French Club is making baked goods for a fundraiser. The only measuring tools available are a 1/8 teaspoon and a 1/3 cup. For each recipe, fill in the numerator to complete an equivalent fraction with the measure of each ingredient. And in parentheses, it says use the 1/8 teaspoon for all teaspoons, TSP measurements, and 1/3 cup for all cup C measurements. And so you see that this is supposed to be a recipe and you fill in the blanks. So we've got 1 1/4 teaspoon active dry yeast equals 10/8 teaspoons. 10/8. So what you're doing is just creating equivalent fractions or equivalent mixed numbers for this. And you'll finish that on slide 2. You'll answer 1 and 2. And then also you have questions 3 and 4. Again, that's a try this. Again, slides 5 and 6 are a challenge activity to try out. 2 and 3 are a must do. All right.